Thank you very much. Now, we'll find out whether it was a good idea for me to have that coffee. Because we're going to build a framework for the edge today. At least that's the aim. Obviously, I can't top that particular introduction, other than that I probably could tell you a dad joke. I wasn't planning on it, but here's a question for you. Do you know why Swedish warships have barcodes on the top of them? No ideas? So when they all come back into port, they can Scandinavian. Okay. That's not, however, my identity, I hope, because I would be in a bit of trouble. My name is Daniel Rowe. I'm involved in a number of different open source projects. Probably the one you might most have heard of is called Nuxt, which is a framework for building web apps, and I'll say a little bit about that. But I'm also a member of the team building Elk, which is a client for Mastodon. Mastodon is a distributed social network, a little bit like Twitter, but you control your own identity. You can create an account and communicate with people on different servers. I also create a library called Fontaine, which helps reduce cumulative layout shift if you're using custom web fonts, and another called Magic Regexp, which compiles to nothing, but makes using regular expressions much better, fully type-safe for a start. And there are a couple of other things there as well. This is where I normally am. That's one of my 3 cats. I typically sit here in the northeast of England with terrible weather outside, nice and cozy, being distracted. That's Lily, is her name. When we adopted her, actually, the family who had her before us called her Hitler, which I feel was unfair. I think she's a lovely cat. And so if you get in contact with me on Twitter or Discord or anything, I would love that. By the way, do contact me if I can ever help or you're wanting to explore something that I've talked about today. I'll probably be sitting here answering the question. Now, I mentioned that I maintain Nuxt. I lead the team of very smart people who are working on that. I would love to know if you have ever used Nuxt. So whether Nuxt 3, which is our current version where we've actually done a full rewrite, Nuxt 2 or not at all. And we'll see if my WebSocket connection here is actually working. I think probably not. That's the impression I'm getting in the room here today. I'm not actually going to show you Nuxt today. So. Well, by the way, this is built with PartyKit, which is an open source library I love. It's fantastic. It's like 5 lines of code. Amazing. So, what is Nuxt? Nuxt is a framework for building full-stack web applications. It's designed to be zero config, so you don't have to focus on, configuring Webpack or Vite or Rollup or your bundler or anything else. But with best practice built in, but fully configurable. That's the aim. Do check it out if you'd like to, and if you have any questions or spot any opportunities for improvement, let me know. A few years ago, we had an opportunity. An opportunity was created by a number of breaking changes in the libraries we depended on with Nuxt, Vue, Webpack, PostCSS. And actually, halfway through this opportunity, there was another opportunity created by a new bundler being created, namely Vite. But it was an opportunity to fully rewrite and rethink Nuxt. In particular, rethink what it meant to create a server framework that's built for the edge, for technology and infrastructure today. So for example, you can't necessarily assume there'll be long-running servers. You might, in fact, need to optimize for fast cold starts and ephemeral existence of a server. We also have new targets, things like Bun and Cloudflare Workers, Dino, platforms that aim for zero config, like Vercel and Netlify and more. And actually, Nuxt 2 wasn't fit for purpose for that. So we thought, let's rewrite the framework from scratch in a new major version. That's never gone wrong before. And we built Nitro, which is our backend, originally built for Nuxt, but it's now used by other frameworks. So in the Angular world, it's used by Analog Meta Framework. And just today, Solid is announcing that they're going to build their full-stack Meta Framework, Solid Start, on top of Nitro. So I want to show you a little bit about Nitro. And as we do so, we're going to explore an ecosystem of libraries that we've built, moved out of the Nuxt namespace into a GitHub org called un.js, so they can be used by anybody, whether or not you're using Nuxt, whether or not you're building a full-stack framework or not. So check the GitHub org out. And the aim today is to build a meta framework from scratch. Now, I was going to give you an option about whether to use Vue or React, but that failed. I found a bug. Not in Nitro, but in something else. OK, so let's get started. So let's install Nitro to start with. This is a pure empty project. Can I check? Can everybody see the screen? I'm sure you can see the screen. Can you see the text on the screen? Should I make it bigger at the back? It's good? OK, if it isn't good, you can shout. So off the bat, Nitro doesn't require any configuration. If you create a roots folder and say a file in there that has a response, say like just an object, and if we were to hit that particular endpoint, we will actually just get the object back. Because we're returning an object, Nitro knows it's going to be JSON and will set the appropriate headers. We could also do something like return some HTML, and Nitro would also return that as HTML for us. And there are lots of other options too. I think we could return null, and it would know that it's going to be a 204 no content response. The aim is to make it as easy as possible to return some server endpoints. Now, you'll notice we have no import for defined event handler, and my IDE is complaining about it, rightly. We have designed Nitro, and actually Nuxt as well, to be fully powered by TypeScript. And rather than requiring you to configure TypeScript, we actually generate one that exactly matches your project's configuration. So we can basically just extend the generated tsconfig, and everything now works. So your editor is now aware of all of the possible things that are auto-importable by Nitro. Nitro will generate the import from defined event handler if it's used. And it enables a lot of other cool things too. So for example, I could create another endpoint and say I want to perform a fetch. So let's just grab a foo and use this $fetch utility. We actually get type-safe access to the roots in our app, and so we can fetch foo like that. But more, we actually get type-safe return from that fetch. So we could actually do something like this, perform a fetch request, and hit bar, and you'll see we get the appropriate response. What's more, this $fetch performs an internal fetch if used in a server endpoint. So it never actually hits the network. It simply calls this foo endpoint as though it's a function and gets the response and returns it, which basically saves precious milliseconds in an edge context. We also have some other nice features, for example. So for example, if I made foo a post endpoint, then it's actually only going to accept that now if I pass a method and try and fetch it. It would complain if I tried to pass, say, get. So we'll do post. And that should work. But that's fun. But let's actually build a framework that renders some view. So we're going to create a little folder, we'll call it app, and create an endpoint there, which is going to return some HTML for our app. If you've used Vue before, which you might not have done, you'll know we have a single file component structure, and we can basically just say something like, hey, Armada.js. And we're going to want to render that somehow to a string that can be returned from our server. So we'll import, well, we first probably need to install Vue. And configure Nitro a little bit. So we can just tell Nitro that we are going to have, oops, no. We're just going to tell Nitro that we have a Vue setup, and so we are going to want to pass rollup plugin Vue, which I installed at the same time. Like that. Okay. Hopefully that's now going to work. So I'm going to import app from app.vue. I'm going to import, what else do I need? Render to string from Vue server renderer. And I also need create app from Vue itself. So basically, this is how it works with Vue. Oh, that was almost correct. Excellent. Oh, this is very good. Thank you, Copilot. So we should be able to do something like this. And it won't do anything, because we also need to tell Nitro that this is something which is going to handle every request that isn't manually specified. So we're going to say it's going to handle root, the wildcard, and we're going to pass this path to a handler. It's actually really important that we have handlers passed with just strings here, because Nitro, by default, when it builds your app, bundle splits each possible endpoint, and then dynamically imports it at runtime. And what that means is that you actually you don't have to load and process the code if it's not required. Again, not relevant in a traditional server setup, but really, really important if you're wanting to hit a serverless function. So there we go. We're rendering some HTML. Let's make that a little bit more interesting. We probably need to have a whole template, so something like this. And we'll create a default main element. And we probably just want to replace that with the content of our HTML. This gives me an opportunity to tell you a little bit about another feature we have with Nitro. We have a storage layer, a universal key value storage layer that works with any backend. So you can use the file system, you can use Redis, you can use in-memory file system, Azure Blob Storage, any possible storage that you can think of. So in this case, we're going to need to get our template, which I've just created here. And so we're going to use that storage layer for reasons that will become clear later on. And we'll just grab index.html. And then return it. So we'll return template, place that with this. And hopefully, ta-da, there we go. So if I load the page, we have got some HTML coming back from the server. So if you're wanting to build a multi-page app, we've just done it. I think that was a fly, by the way, not a single very impressed clap. Although I would like to think that it was a single very impressed clap. To make this a client-side framework, we need to install something that's going to handle that. And we're going to use Vite for that. So if we install Vite and Vite's Vue plugin, then we can set up Vite. It's a little bit more complicated. We can use Nitro's dev handlers option. These are things that only run in development mode, so they're not part of the build, because we don't want actually to bundle Vite's dev server in the build. So we're going to pass a particular route, and then we can actually use a function. And now we have this thing called define lazy. define lazy event handler from Nitro, which allows performing some kind of setup the first time a handler is loaded, and then it doesn't need to be used from that point onward. So we can pull in Vite's dev server here. So do something like this. I think it's just called create server. And we can pass some configurations. So it's going to have this Vite base. It's going to be a custom app. So Vite doesn't start its own server. And we're going to enable middleware mode as well. And then we just return the handler from this async function. So we do from node middleware, server middlewares, and import that as well. You'll notice a lot of what I've been doing uses this H3. H3 is like an express replacement, but built for the modern web. It doesn't have hard node dependencies or anything like that, which is why it ships with utilities to convert express-type request-response handlers into generic ones that work in any runtime. It actually creates a mock of the node request-response object, so you can use it anywhere. Let's see what happens if we run our dev server. I would expect at this point to be able to get a special Vite utility called @ViteClient, and it's coming back. Great. We need a little more, though. So basically, when we load the HTML, you need to, if you're using Vite, you need to basically tell the browser to fetch the code that is going to configure Vite. And so we have this ViteClient endpoint. And we also need to tell Vite that we are going to, the source of the actual client app that it needs to load. So we're going to need to create that. So the good news is it's really simple. Vue has a create SSR app, which is used to hydrate something that's been rendered by the server. So we would do something like this. And then we just do app mount to, I think it was called root. That's right. And hopefully, if I fire up the dev server, reload the page, oh no. I need to tell Vite to process Vue as well. And there's a special plugin for that, which we can import. By the way, the whole rollup ecosystem with Vite, rollup, and others has really made a huge difference to cross-framework innovation. Because particularly, I'd like to highlight something called Unplugin, which was created by Anthony Fu, who's an incredible developer, which actually allows you to write build plugins that work anywhere in ESBuild, Rollup, Vite, Webpack, RSPack, and more. But hey, we seem to be working. So Vite has connected, which might mean that we have HMR. We do. OK. We just built a client-side, server-side framework that's rendering Vue. Let's make it a little bit more fun. So one of the things we use a lot in Nuxt is auto imports, and you've already seen them with things like define event handler, but we can also expose our own. So in this case, we might want to expose some auto imports from Vue, and we might want to expose ref and computed, for example. Those are some really simple ones. And we might also we'll need to do the same for the Vite side of things. So we'll install unplugin auto import, which was built with this unplugin library I'm telling you about. And we will import that and stick it in our Vite config as well, and pass in the same configuration. I think that looks right. Start our Nitro dev server again, and now we should be able to do something like this. Great. So we have type safety for our auto-imported composable. We can actually use it in our template, and hopefully, great, it's working. We're able to load that from the server, and hopefully, no errors on client side. We also, of course, get some client-side reactivity. And I'd like to make this look a little bit nicer, so we'll install Pico CSS, and we'll just import it here. This is a lovely styling layer for just basic HTML, which makes it look a lot nicer. So we could do something like this. And we'll maybe add a button. Hey there. Reload the page. OK, looking good. And let's make something that's actually reactive. So we'll have a count, and we'll display that count in a code block, I guess. And then we'll increment it when you click the button. There we go. Client-side reactivity. OK, so we've done quite a lot in terms of building our app. But at the moment, it's fully using Nitro. And we have our Nitro config. But I promised to show you how to build a meta framework. So we probably need to build our own CLI as well. And this is going to use, I can never remember this, by the way. I think it's that. And we'll TS check the file. We're going to use a utility called Kitty, which is another UnJS one, and another one called C12. And Kitty enables you to make CLI tools very easily. There are a lot of features it has, including lazy loading commands. But in this case, I'm going to use the simplest possible implementation. So here we're going to have some subcommands, and they're going to be dev and build. And then each of those is going to have a run function. These could be promises, like you could do you could just do a function that imports some other chunk. But in this case, I think we can just run straight away. So in this case, we're going to load the configuration first, and we're going to do that from C12. C12 allows you to load configuration from TypeScript, MJS, CJS, anywhere. So we're going to load some configuration from a config file that we're going to call armada.config. And we're going to have some overrides. So we're going to force dev to be true. And we're going to have some default configuration as well. So we can basically take our configuration from here, paste it into our CLI, move the configuration to be our default config. Okay. And we should now be able just to pass that here as our default config. And now we can take full control over what Nitro is going to do. This sort of move from convention to full programmatic control of what's happening is, I think, really what starts to make this feel like a meta framework. So we do something like Nitro, create Nitro. We're going to pass the config. We have to do a couple of other things. We should probably prepare the environment. That's going to do things like write this .nitro folder. We're going to want to create the server, dev server. We're going to want to listen. We're going to hard code it to 3000. We're going to want to build Nitro. I want to import that from Nitro. And I think that might be enough. Let's see what happens. I'm going to give it executable permissions and run the dev server. Cool. OK, so we basically created our own CLI. We'll add some scripts here. So we have a dev script, which is going to run bin CLI dev. And we're going to do the same for build. Great. So pnpm dev will fire that up for us. Build is a little bit more complicated. Well, actually, not hugely more complicated. We're going to do the same kind of thing. We're going to load our configuration. We are going to not create a dev server. We're going to write some types. we are going to build the Vite server, I guess. So we're going to need to import that as well. And we'll pass some options. We probably won't pass most of this stuff, but we'll need our plugins. And we'll use an out directory. So we know where its outputs are going. And then we are going to do one more thing, which is we're going to copy public assets into the Nitro build. Basically, when Nitro builds an app, it builds it for a particular preset. So if I were to just run Nitro, well, I guess I could run our build command, see if that works. Yeah, not yet. If I were to just run Nitro build, it would create a .output folder, and in there is going to be a public folder, which is all of your public assets that can go on a CDN or something like that. And then the server will have your dynamic SSR side of things. In this case, we have to configure a few more things for us. So this is our current configuration in our index.html that's correct for the server, but it's actually not what Vite is expecting to see. So I think if we update that, Vite should build correctly, and Nitro is then going to build some chunks for us. So just as I said that there would be some bundle split chunks for some different endpoints, so foo has its own, bar has its own, and those can be dynamically imported. We also have Nitro client, which is the Vite build. Are you all with me, by the way? I'm aware I can get lost in this. I could be in this all day. So we're going to do a couple of things here. We need to tell Nitro that this build folder exists and to handle it properly. So we can configure public assets directories, and you can layer these. So you can have multiple public directories which all get assembled at runtime into one thing. So we have here a base URL. We're going to stick them in an assets folder. And then we have a directory, which is going to be .nitro client assets. And we'll also assign a max age, because these can be cached, their build output. So if I now run the build command, Nitro should automatically pick up those assets and stick them in my public folder. There we go. So we've got our assets, which is one JS file. We also want to do one more thing. And you see Vite also outputs this sort of modified index.html, which links to that JS file. So we're going to want to handle that. And this is where the storage layer that I demonstrated very briefly earlier comes in, because we can actually reroute the storage. So in this case, we want to set up some dev storage. So in development mode, we're going to have this prefix called templates. And templates is going to have a file system driver. And that file system driver, I think base is correct, we can pass it Nitro templates. We can also then bundle it at runtime. So we can say everything present in that directory when we build, we're actually going to inline in the server. So we don't have to think about the file system at build time. So we'll do something like this. So template is Nitro storage get item root index.html. And that is a string. And then we're going to write it back. So Nitro, for goodness sake, set item templates index.html, and then we'll just replace that template. We have something, and we're going to replace it with these lines of code. And I think what we have at the moment is that. Cool. We're going to want to do something very similar at build time, but pointing to a different file. So we're not going to grab root. We're going to grab the build directory, the client folder, and index.html, and we're just going to write that as our templates. And so in server, now we can just use that prefix. The way the storage works is it's like a Linux or a Unix file system. You can mount different kinds of storage to different prefixes. So you can have like your users using a persistent storage mechanism, but you might have something else that you just want to cache right directly to memory. Let's see if this works. This is really fingers crossed at this point. Let's run it. Let's hit the endpoint. Okay, we're getting SSR. Let's hit the endpoint here. Not got any styles. Yeah, we've got an issue. What is our console saying? Defines is not defined. I have never seen that error in my life before, which is not a positive sign, in all honesty. I think, okay, what's going on here? Interesting. I think we are just going to move smoothly past this. And let's assume it's something to do with our auto imports. And I'll just comment them out. Nope, that's not it. Okay. I want to show you a couple of things about Nitro's capabilities. Well, in the back of my mind, I dispatch a little librarian to the stacks to try and figure out what's going wrong. And that little librarian will hopefully come back and help me at some point. So what we want to do at this point is take a look at the build output. So we have a server, which is running, and the server is rendering some JavaScript code, which isn't quite right. And that's probably to do with how I've configured Vite. So, I think I know what it is. I bet it's the fact that I've instantiated this twice. No, it's not. I shouldn't be looking at this. I should just be showing you the output. So in an environment, for example, if you're in Vercel, we could run our build, and Nitro is going to pick up on the fact that it's in a different environment, and it's going to output something that works in a Vercel environment. If we were to do the same with Cloudflare, I'm just actually going to manually override the Cloudflare preset at this point and say we're going to build for Cloudflare pages. Then it's going to build and create a server that's going to work on Cloudflare for us, which is going to be a single entry point. It's going to have a couple of other things that Cloudflare expects. We can actually preview it like this, and it should give us an SSR response, but it won't fix the Vite issue. So let's just see if that works. Oops. Cloudflare wants to authenticate me. Is there no way? Okay, thanks, Cloudflare. Are we authenticated yet? And, oh, it's possible I didn't need to do that. Let's just try this. Great. So you see the SSR response is coming through just as well. If we were to commit all of this to, just going to git ignore dist, and we're going to just commit this and stick it up. Yeah. I'm going to demonstrate exactly what the sort of auto-deploy looks like. So I'm going to add a new project. Hopefully, we've just pushed to my personal namespace, Armada.js. I'm going to import that into Vercel. We really have a very high value from the Nuxt and Nitro end in making things zero config. So we use a library called standard-env, which is what detects these different environments and allows us to configure them automatically. So do check that out if you want. It's usable by anyone. OK, so Vercel's already built the project and deployed it. And hopefully, it should display, hey, Armada.js with HMR. We'll still have a console log error. But Nitro is working for us. There's some other things we can also do with Nitro, which I think are pretty cool. I wonder... never mind. Things like root rules. So we can specify different kinds of behavior to match different kinds of routes. So for example, foo, we might want to enable ISR. And so the first time that route is hit, it's generated, and from that point onwards, it's served from Vercel's CDN. Or we might want to do something like our admin pages, and we can pass some other kind of rule here. So maybe our foo endpoint, we also want to enable CORS headers. Our admin endpoint, we might want to pre-render. So when you build the app, it pre-renders it, and then serves that HTML directly rather than hitting some kind of endpoint. And there are headers and cache utilities and lots more that we could do there. There's a lot more that Nitro offers that I don't really have time to cover, but lots and lots of configuration that's available to configure. I am going to have a look when I sit down for my talk to find out what exactly I did wrong in my configuration of Vite. But I hope the general impression is there. And you can check out the code and have a look at what it's possible to do with Nitro, and maybe build your own meta framework. Or check out Nuxt, where we've done a lot of these things for you and made it possible to abstract away a lot of the pain. If you're interested in checking things further, we have some documentation on Nuxt and Nitro. It's possible to follow Nuxt on X, which is the great new name for Twitter, or on Mastodon. And I'm there as well if you want to chat or DM. And there's a Discord server if that interests you as well. It has been a real privilege to chat, and I'm loving my first time in Serbia, so thank you very much for having me.